Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And today we're looking through the second chapter of Anthony Kenny's A New History of Western Philosophy, and that is A Schools of Thought from Aristotle to Augustine.
Much better section of this book. The last one, I almost quit. I almost quit this entire endeavor. That was work, and this was enjoyable.
I will say this was a lot easier to read than the last chapter, mainly because it focused on a lot fewer philosophers. So
Yeah.
a lot more important philosophers too, I would have to say.
Yeah. More meaningful for present day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. So should we go ahead and begin with Aristotle?
Yes.
All right.
Are you an Aristotelian?
Aristotelian?
Is that how you say it?
Aristotelian, yeah.
Or you're a Platonist?
Platonist, yes.
Yeah, which one?
Well, let's talk about that when we get to it later in the reading.
Why don't we talk about it now?
Well, I guess we can. I would say we haven't really talked about what an Aristotelian is yet. We got to talk about that first.
Well, you can kind of give the listener
something to look forward to.
Preview.
Yeah. Well, just a little preview.
Yes.
I'd consider myself an Aristotelian.
Aristotelian.
Aristotelian?
I think so.
Okay.
And as am I.
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page here.
Yes.
All right, so for starters, Aristotle in the Academy. So Aristotle wasn't really a Greek at all. He was a Macedonian, and he was...
Aren't the Macedonians Greek?
Ask a Macedonian.
Well, aren't they from northern Greece? They're not Athenian.
No.
They're Macedonian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you ask. I'm pretty sure Macedon was a country in of itself, besides
so.
Greece for a long time.
That's true.
So
Yeah,
it depends on who you ask. That comment might anger some people out there.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah.
We just lost our listener.
Yeah, our one Macedonian listener.
He was waiting.
He was waiting for us
his
to talk about Macedonia. He's out.
And I just insulted
Yes.
him or her.
Yes. So Aristotle was a student of Plato in the Academy. And it talks about it a little later here in Kenny's book that a lot of times Aristotle's depicted as almost like a bull kind of uprising against Plato in a way. Because they did have...
bull?
I think so.
Really, a bull?
Like a stubborn bull, yeah.
Oh.
Pretty sure that's what it says in here.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
But I see him as, like he's been described historically at times, as kind of like an ungrateful pupil.
Yes.
Challenging his teacher or his master's ideas, you know, without a whole lot of thought or whatever. But I don't read it that way, and I don't think our author does of this book does. You know,
he says that it has been made at some points, but I don't think he argues really that point.
Yeah, I think he argues that he's more of a follower and kind of made some modifications of a lot of the Platonic theories and ideals and all that.
Yes. So Aristotle, really some of his early beliefs were about the soul, and he kind of adopts Plato's beliefs in a way, but he believes that the soul is really not better when it's within the body. He believes the body kind of inhibits the soul from like realizing its true potential, and he kind of puts forward like one of the biggest problems facing society is fear of death. And really, it's only in death that our soul can become like fully free and become like fully the soul itself.
It's a really,
in a way.
Don't you think that's a really interesting and also frightening concept, and almost an advocacy for immediate suicide, right?
In a way.
Why on earth are you delaying the freedom of the afterlife?
Yep, it says that right here.
I also thought his quote, the first page of this, I don't know if I have this underlined in red and blue.
Ooh.
Yes.
Mixed purple.
No, they're next to each other.
Oh, okay.
I have my handy dandy Papermate Inkjoy pen that has 4 separate inks in it.
Yes. Yes. You're very proud of that pen.
Yes, I have 2 of them. I thought this was an interesting quote. It's from Aristotle, translated to English. It is best for all men and women not to be born. And next after that, the best option for humans to once born to die as quickly as possible.
Yes, to die is to return to one's real home, which is...
I think that Planned Parenthood should have like an Aristotle branch.
Yes, that'd be...
That seems to be their mantra. It is best for all men and women not to have been born.
Well, I mean, with Planned Parenthood, it's not all men and women. It's usually minorities. But
Oh, well,
that's
well, I think they're just more effective. The minorities. I'm pretty sure they're they don't want any more people born.
Yes.
It seems like. But
anyway.
I thought of them when I read that. Well, they would really get off on that one.
Mm-hmm.
See, Aristotle was right. We should kill all the babies.
Yeah.
Now we've lost the one pro-choice.
Yes.
Listener.
We're slowly ticking off the list.
Yeah, well,
Eventually, we'll have removed all 30.
The Macedonian left and then was replaced by a pro-choice advocate.
So now they're gone.
And now she's gone. All right. Okay, I'm sorry. I interrupted your train of thought. You were talking about how
Aristotle.
It's strange how he. But I kind of almost sympathize more with those philosophers of that age that denigrated the living physical being of life back then, because it was so brutal. There are so many diseases and so many hardships, even with the aristocracy, their relative wealth. It was a tough, brutal existence and short.
Yes.
And so I could see how you could advocate that death is advocate for the sweet release of death.
Yes, that's a warming thought. So another one of Aristotle's core beliefs is that you can't really escape philosophy. Everybody practices philosophy in a way. Like, even if you argue against the practice of philosophy, that is a philosophy in of itself. You really just can't escape it, because philosophy is really just the study of everything. And if you make a comment on anything, you're making a philosophical statement.
That reminded me of the classic rock band Rush.
I don't know where this is going.
Where they said, I think the paraphrasing maybe the lyrics, even if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Yes.
And so he had the same kind of thought that if you are contemplating how philosophy is a waste of time, you've just philosophized.
Yes.
Yeah, which is true.
It is very true.
And so you can't escape it.
Mm-hmm. That is, yeah, absolutely.
You're trapped.
Mm-hmm.
We're all philosophers.
Yes, we're all philosophers.
Want to be or not.
Yes. And another one of Aristotle's later philosophy is really the discipline of logic and rhetoric and that sort of thing. This is a quote here. There are many treatises on rhetoric, he says, but on the subject of deduction, we had nothing of an earlier date to cite, but needed to spend a long time on original research. If then it seems to you on inspection that from such an unpromising start we have brought our investigation to a satisfactory condition comparable to that of traditional disciplines, it falls to you, my students, to grant me your pardon for the shortcomings of the inquiry, and for its discoveries your warm thanks. So that's just an interesting little section there, because you really, before, to make any sort of philosophy, to make any sort of educated opinion, you had to research it yourself. And I think really with these schools of thought that we're starting to see pop up all over the place, first with the Academy, and then later we'll see with Aristotle's Lyceum, it's really this foundation of a hub for knowledge. And I feel like that's really a great boon to Aristotle's philosophy, is that we'll see later he made basically just a big public library. Yes. And just the spread of knowledge as a whole, accessible knowledge, is just a great boon to philosophers of all kinds.
Well, and when you know a little bit more about Aristotle, and he was basically a zoologist, you know, with all his study of animal life, and that kind of, he really had a scientific method going on there, and I think that was part of his the draw to him for the logic, to organize his thoughts on all these different subjects, and thank goodness he did and took the effort to and advance the education and learning of everybody, the logical formation and formal logic and all that.
Yes. And I apologize. I realize I misremembered the comparison. Some in antiquity likened Aristotle to an ungrateful colt who had kicked his mother, not a bull.
That's right.
So, yes.
Yeah. So much. Yeah.
Yes.
A colt is a better analogy. A bull is mean.
Yes.
Have you ever seen a bull?
Yes.
No, I mean like live and in person.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I wasn't aware that you've seen bulls.
I've seen bulls.
They can be very, very mean.
Yes.
And they're colorblind.
Yes, I knew that.
And people say, well, you don't wave a red flag in front of a bull.
But they're colorblind.
I guess being colorblind makes them angry.
Yes, because they can't tell what color the flag is. Yeah.
But they'll just charge you for really no reason, evidently. I don't know much about bulls.
Yes, neither do I.
but I know a lot of bull.
An unlimited amount, you might say.
Oh, hey. That's funny.
Yes. So really kind of moving on, it talks about, Kenny talks here about Aristotle being a biologist. He talks about this for quite a while. We'll kind of paraphrase this just a little bit because...
Wait, before we get to that, I think it's important to like the distinction between Aristotle and Plato, which is mentioned before the author gets to Aristotle the biologist, was when he's talking about Plato's forms and his ideas.
Yes, his theory of ideas.
And I really like how Aristotle, this Mr. Kenny identifies Aristotle's theory that by having these ideals of ideas, all Aristotle's basically saying that all you're really doing is doubling the number of problems because you're not really going to
the problem itself.
The problem itself, you now have another layer of some sort of ideal above everything else, and you really haven't solved any problems. Now you just have another category of issues to
your problems. Your problems become how do we solve the problem, and then how do you solve that problem? It's just all the way down, just more and more problems. That's a good point to make. Good distinction. And Aristotle, as a biologist, he was very, very interested in classifying animals, and it's really with him we get the first work of classification into genus and species. So there's more than 500 species that he figures in his treatises, and many of them are described in detail. And he's very much an anatomist. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. So studying this, not just like the different types of animals, but how each one works and the organs and makeup of each individual animal, which I thought was interesting because it's kind of a break from the earlier philosophers in a way who are more concerned about, the four elements. But he's really looking at, maybe not, it's not just earth, it's not just these things. We really look at the interior and how things work in a more complex way.
And then he also tried to extrapolate from his scientific studies to making judgments about people, which is described by Mr. Kenny, or among his theories were those who have large and prominent ears have a tendency to irrelevant chatter.
Yes.
And I have large ears, so...
And you have unlimited opinions.
I think maybe he's onto something there. But I often wonder, since reading this now, I'm thinking, I wonder if he went around and measured people's ears. And, maybe he studied people that were really chatty.
I guess it's possible.
Looked at them and thought, what's the same about all these chatty people?
Big ears.
Yeah, but maybe they're all just cousins.
I guess that's possible, too.
Anywho.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he espoused a certain scientific method.
Yeah.
There's a description here on page 62 that the facts have not yet been. He has a certain amount of humility about his views. This was a point that the author was making, where he's saying Aristotle says the facts have not yet been sufficiently ascertained. If ever they are, then we must trust observation rather than theory. And trust theories only when their results conform with the observed phenomena.
Yeah.
I mean, that's rock solid scientific method there, and that's really the theory behind it. And I wrote on the side of my own political modern day observation. Tell the global warming people. And I was thinking, I think the polar ice caps were supposed to have melted a couple of years ago, and I think the Himalayas were supposed to have melted like 5 years ago.
Well, 50 years ago, we were supposed to go into another ice age.
Oh, it was less than that. It was during my lifetime. That was in the 70s. Yeah, they had a front page when they used to have magazines.
Yes.
I think it was Time magazine said the global cooling. It was the big. It was like a big panic for like a year or two. Global cooling. Yeah, so don't believe anything. So, and then go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say we're gonna move on to the Lyceum and its curriculum. And the Lyceum is Aristotle's school, and Aristotle kind of starts his career as a teacher, teaching Alexander the Great.
Isn't that wild? I mean, you've got Socrates, and Aristotle, I think, was born like 16 years after Socrates died. But you have Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle, and Aristotle becomes the tutor for. Was it King Philip's son, who was Alexander the Great? And it doesn't look like we have any evidence of what he actually taught the guy, but he must have taught him something because, boy, he went on a tear.
Yeah. He started teaching Alexander the Great when he was 13 years old. And within 10 years, Alexander had made himself master of an empire that stretched from the Danube to the Indus and included Libya and Egypt. So, conquered a lot.
Man, I mean, and he was just at war the entire time, and that's a whole nother interesting subject. I've read a couple books about Alexander the Great, and just what he was able to accomplish was just amazing, and the kind of the madness he dissolved into, where he became like godlike in his own mind, and it's thought that one of his own people poisoned him, but they don't know for sure. But he conquered. I mean, it was just the geographic area, pretty amazing. So I wonder how much Aristotle had taught him. He certainly would have taught him logic. And, but he didn't seem to follow everything from Aristotle. And Aristotle doesn't seem to ever write about him. You'd think there would be something about Alexander the Great in some of his writing. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah. But it's interesting because Kenny says here that Aristotle's anatomical and zoological studies had given a new and definitive turn to his philosophy. So he kind of like goes back to his interest in metaphysics, but this time he wants to make like an empirical science out of it. And this is where the Lyceum kind of comes into play, because this is where he builds this great, kind of like the academy, but it's different in that it has this huge library with many different researchers and lecturers, and all the lectures are open to the whole public. Right, so it's not like a private exclusive club like the academy was, but it is open for anybody to come and hear these lectures.
Yeah, it was interesting to me how he has three different topics of philosophy or of inquiry, I guess you'd say. The productive, the practical, and the theoretical sciences,
yes.
which is pretty... just seems like he has just a logical approach to everything.
Yeah.
And the only thing that really limited him was the ability. There were some people ahead of him, or before him, but imagine what he would do with the knowledge available to people today.
Yeah, absolutely.
My gosh.
It's interesting, the like you said, the three kinds of scientists: the productive, which have a product, whether that's like a physical thing, like an engineering, or if it's strategy and rhetoric. Practical, which is like a guide for behavior. And then theoretical, I thought it was interesting because these have no product and no practical goal, and they're just for the sake of information. And he breaks those down to three more sections. That's mathematics, physics, which back then wasn't the mathematical physics that we know today, but it's like natural philosophy and the study of nature. And then theology, which is kind of the superior philosophy, and it encompasses astronomy and studying the stars and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then ultimately gets back to the four element stuff again. It's like they're all stuck in it.
Yeah.
Like at this point, is he in Athens at this point? I'm trying to remember.
Oh, I'm sure it says somewhere here.
Or maybe at that point where he's talking about his those concepts. But he's so brilliant on other things, and he seems to be stuck with those same four elements: the fire, water, earth, and air.
Yeah.
But has a different theory about it. But I don't need to go into that. But I think his best things are on rhetoric, and logic, and the scientific angles to it. That's
a good segue into the next section here, which is Aristotle on rhetoric and poetry. And really, he breaks rhetoric, basically just the science of arguing. He breaks it down into three bases. The first is the character of the speaker, the second is the mood of the audience, and the third is the argument itself. And that's really the foundation of ethos, logos, and pathos that we're told to argue with today.
Three Musketeers? No, wait, that's Aramis. All right.
All right. But it's interesting. I just make that note about ethos, logos, and pathos because those three basically core bases of persuasion are still taught to us today about how we should, frame our points, how we make ourselves feel, supported, how we make ourselves, feel like we have a good base behind our information, how we actually appeal to the audience, so just passion and that sort of thing in your speaking, and then the logic of the argument itself, how well it would just stand on its own.
Amen, brother.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and then he goes on. It's actually a long section about his analysis of of tragedy, even
Yes.
in their writing styles, and which I think is interesting. I don't know why.
No, I thought this was very, very fascinating because this is something. Oh yeah.
Oh, you're in linguistics.
Well,
stuff.
these are that sort of thing, but
so much detail.
Yes.
About how he thinks about literature.
he describes that there's 6 things necessary for tragedy. The 2 most important are plot and character, and then it's diction, it's thought, spectacle, and melody. So it's really there's just so many different types of things that go into these Greek plays. But really, the 2 most important are the plot, what really happens, and then the character. And he kind of describes what needs to happen in a plot. There needs to be like a turning point for the character. He needs to uncover this new information. And it's very interesting because if you look over there, that book right over there that I have sitting there that I haven't read yet, it's Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And Joseph Campbell is 20th century mythologist. He studied different mythologies, and he puts forth this theory of the monomyth, which is like in all these great stories, we go back through time, there is this certain formula that all of them follow. And it's just interesting that Aristotle points it out here. Because new discovery of information, the redeeming moment, that's something that Joseph Campbell puts forth in his cycle of the hero with 1,000 faces. It's interesting to me that that's been pointed out already with really, I guess, just so little available literature.
Oh, back then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Very, very smart of him to recognize that early on. Of course, they had a lot of writers back then. I mean, they wrote a lot of plays, a lot of public performances. I mean, it also describes any stories by J.R.R. Tolkien too. I mean, he has the same theory.
In a way, we can get into that a little bit later.
I mean, that's what it is.
Nah, because
because not Frodo, the other one, the one I like. What's his name?
Sam.
No.
Aragorn?
No, the uncle. The original.
Oh, Bilbo.
Yeah, so Bilbo, it has this ring, but he doesn't know it's the bad ring.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Till later.
I mean, it's a common comparison to compare Frodo to the, monomyth, the mono hero, the common thing. But what's really interesting is he doesn't really fit the framework of the good hero because he doesn't succeed. He succeeds on accident because he falls victim to the tragedy in the end. He falls victim to corruption, and it's only through...
He's not the hero. Samwise is the hero.
In a way.
In a way. How is he not the hero of the whole story?
Well, how is he?
He did everything right. He kept that mission.
Well, doing everything right doesn't make you the hero.
He is the reluctant traveler. He is the defender of Frodo every step of the way.
Well, there can be multiple heroes in a story.
But Frodo's not a hero. Frodo's a failure.
Well,
Frodo's weak. He gave up their position I don't know how many times.
All right, we're going to have to move on from this topic because it's going to get a little heated in here.
And then he turns.
All right.
He turns.
Yeah, that's
what.
No,
I'm not going to. I'm going to give up.
That's what I was saying. That's why he doesn't fit the framework of the classical
he's not
hero.
A hero.
Well, he's a hero. He's just not Joseph Campbell's monomyth hero.
How is Frodo a hero?
He carried the weight of the ring like hundreds of miles,
like a sack of wet cement, while Sam is carrying him the whole way.
Anyway, Aristotle's ethical treatises. We got to move on from this topic.
But I was talking about Bilbo anyway. He's a hero.
Yes, he is. I won't disagree with that.
That's right, that Frodo. All
right. So he has 3 treatises on moral philosophy.
And I thought his I'm interrupting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
His ultimate good, like the goal or the purpose is happiness.
Yes.
Which is interesting. And then, but he says you can only be happy if you are virtuous.
Yes.
So, and so he is similar to Plato's, pushing the virtuous angle to it. And so I guess really what your ultimate goal would be virtue, but I guess that's to obtain happiness. But he also talks about the difference, the virtue of wisdom as opposed to the virtue of understanding.
Yes.
And just because you know something doesn't mean you're wise or good.
Yes.
And you need something more in the form of wisdom.
And this is kind of where he goes against Plato's theory of ideas, which I know you kind of despise, because he really argues against like the idea of good being like the best thing, because the idea of good is so unattainable. It's just that. It's just an idea. And because it's so perfect and we have to meet all these different criteria, we can never really do that. And so really the supreme good is only happiness. And happiness, like you said, is obtained through the moral and intellectual virtues. So it's really just going against Plato's theory of ideas.
Yeah, and it's and I don't know. I guess they'll probably get into this at a later time, but happiness as the end all is an issue too, because some bad things can make you happy temporarily.
Yes. Then we kind of move on to Aristotle's political theory, and like his work in zoology, it combines observation and theory. So it's kind of going back to that like scientific method of what is the best political theory, and he kind of describes it as really the basis of his moral philosophy too, is that we must make ourselves as immortal as possible, right? To make ourselves like gods, and that is only attainable through virtue and through the good, happiness. And he kind of says that state is the highest community, and so it must have the highest amount of goods within it to actually present forth this option of becoming as immortal as possible.
Right. and it mentions here he collected 158 constitutions. Back in that day they had city-states that each had their own constitution. So, but 158 was just amazing to me.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And that statement that the state is the highest doesn't ring true to this guy here. In our current constitutional setup, where we think the state is the most dangerous thing, but in a sense, as he describes it, like where you have the immediate family, then the clan, then the village, then the state has to have that type of higher elevation, and if you have to be an effective state, it has to have higher virtues as its foundation.
Yeah, I do like how he kind of goes against Plato's Republic here, because Plato's Republic is
practical.
Yes,
and
it has impractical.
Going on.
Yeah, and how it's really kind of communistic, and he says that property should be willingly shared, but it should be privatized. Like we should be able to own our own property. But if we really want to obtain like good and happiness, we have a duty to share it as much as we can. But in the end, we do have property that belongs to us.
Yep.
I just thought that was kind of neat that he mentions that here.
Well, I mean, anybody who studies it knows that if you just put everything in a commune, it's all shared by everybody. It's not going to work practically.
Yeah. And he makes this distinction between all these different types of governments. And I'm going to read this big section of text here on page 71, because I just think, it's a great summary of basically all of his political theory. It's not so much a summary, it's a very long paragraph, but he says that the government, that is to say the supreme authority in a state, must be in the hands of one or of a few or of the many. The rightful true forms of government, therefore, are ones where the one or the few or the many govern with a view to the common interest. Governments that rule with a view to the private interest, whether of the one or the few or the many, are perversions. Those who belong to a state, if they are truly to be called citizens, must share in its benefits. Government by a single person, if it aims at the common interest, we are accustomed to call monarchy. Some similar government by a minority we call aristocracy, either because the rulers are the best men, or because it governs in the common, or because it aims at the best interests of the state and the community. When it is the majority that governs in the common interest, we call it a polity, using a word which is also a generic term for a constitution. Of each of these forms of government there exists a perversion. The perversion of monarchy is a tyranny, that of aristocracy is oligarchy, that of polity is democracy. For tyranny is a monarchy exercised solely for the benefit of the monarch, oligarchy has in view only the interests of the wealthy, and democracy the interests only of the poorer classes. None of these aims at the common good of all. I just thought it was neat, the distinction between this polity and democracy, because polity is really more similar to what I think we would call democracy today in a way, really, because he points out democracy is just mob rule, basically, just the whole people arguing for this as themselves as the lower class, and really just overthrowing these top forms of government, really.
Well, I mean, democracy is mob rule.
Yes.
And so what we have is obviously a republic. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting how he talks about, like, you can have these forms of government in the ideal, as if they'd work, but then there's a perversion of it if
Yes.
they aren't run well. But none of them work.
Yes.
And so I guess in his day and age, some would work better than others depending on who the monarch is or who the family is that's in charge, or the aristocracy. But I guess any sort of form of government can work for a period of time, but eventually they're all going to fail unless you have some sort of control to keep the government or the majority of people from exerting their force or their will against people they don't like, just out of human nature. But it was interesting. He's also recognized that there are basically three elements to any government, which is he describes it as the deliberative, the official, and the judicial, which of course is the legislature, the executive, and the judicial.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny how he's recognized that on how many
already
years ago. Right.
I also think it's kind of interesting his notes about slavery. So he kind of believes that it's morally okay for some people to be slaves because they are just inferior to other people, and in some cases it's better for them to be slaves because left to their own devices they'd be miserable without the hand of a kind master, basically. But he does put forth that some slavery is awful, is terrible because unjust masters, cruel masters. So he's kind of making the case that slavery's okay as long as the master is a good one.
Yeah, it's hard to. It really is jarring when you read that those thoughts on paper. But when you think back at it, slavery was the norm.
Yeah.
In his society, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, up until really modern day times with Christianity.
Yeah.
Taking root but yeah, it's funny.
He also
how he describes
yeah.
it.
He also really didn't like commerce in a way. I thought this little passage here is interesting. The most hated sort of wealth getting is usury, which makes a profit out of money itself rather than from its natural purpose, for money was intended to be used for exchange, not to increase its interest. It got the name interest, tokos, which means the birth of money from money, because an offspring resembles its parent. For this reason, of all the modes of getting wealth, this is the most unnatural.
You call it usury?
Usury.
I call it usury.
Usury.
It's like charging interest.
Yeah.
And that I know that the Muslim faith does not appreciate that. They don't have the same banking systems that the West has for those reasons.
It's interesting. I also kind of like the note that Kenny puts in here that he looks at all these different countries and he kind of criticizes and praises different good and bad things about them, and that is every country except his own. He kind of says that just like we do that today, we're all very quick to judge other countries before we judge our own.
Well, it might be fatal back in his time.
That's true. And then we kind of move on to Aristotle's cosmology. And again, he talks about the four elements, so we're back there again on the four elements. But they're characterized by unique pairs of the properties, heat, cold, wetness, and dryness. So it's not just the four elements, but the four elements are made up of these, again, four different properties, which I thought was interesting. So it's kind of expanding the four elements a little bit, but still, they're still stuck on this four elements thing, which I just think is so weird.
Well, he's a product of his time, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know more than that if you don't have the science background to know what the stuff is made of.
Mm-hmm.
I did like how he questioned a lot of different things. Like, I like this one. He questioned, why is it more terrible to kill a woman than a man, although the male is naturally superior to the female?
Yes, that's
funny. And then he also asks, why is it that some people, even if they begin to read a serious book, are overcome by sleep, even against their will?
Yes. That's so that I kind of just made a note here. This is quotes from his Problems book, in which it's kind of just different questions that his students asked him and he thought of answers to. And I just made a note that Problems is a great book of nonsense questions because they don't really seem to serve much purpose. It's kind of a comforting thought to think, like we think of Aristotle, these great philosophers, they spent all their time thinking of these great new ideals for the future, when in reality they were wondering why drunken men kiss old women when they would never kiss when sober. So it's like, they did make great contributions, but at the same time they they didn't have too much going on.
Well, even they recognize the concept of beer goggles.
Yes. They also recognize that fishermen have red hair, apparently.
Again, I think it's a cousin thing.
Yeah. So then Kenny, after that, talks about the legacy of Aristotle and Plato. So it's like, well, why do they really matter? And he makes a comparison between the two, and that Plato is idealistic, utopian, and otherworldly, and Aristotle is realistic, utilitarian, and commonsensical. And so then he quotes S.T. Coleridge, in that there are two classes of men here on page 76. Every man is born an Aristotelian or a Platonist. They are the two classes of men besides which it is next impossible to conceive a third. And then he talks about the philosopher Gilbert Ryle, who in the 20th century improved on Coleridge. He said that men could be divided into two classes on the basis of four dichotomies: green versus blue, sweet versus savory, cats versus dogs, and Plato versus Aristotle.
Dogs.
Tell me your preference on one of these pairs, Ryle used to say, and I will tell your preference on the other three.
No, did dogs go with Aristotle?
Mm-hmm.
Do they?
Yes.
We sure?
Yes.
Good.
So it's green, sweet, cats, and Plato, and then blue, savory, dogs, and Aristotle.
What about blue?
I mean, I like blue. I lean towards Aristotle.
Interesting.
Yes.
I don't think I followed that one.
Well, no, I kind of agree with it and follows what I say, so
Yeah.
it makes sense to me. Then he kind of just summarizes Aristotle just as a philosopher here in the last paragraph on 76. It's a big, long paragraph that I won't read.
Not read.
I will not read all of it, but it's just like he contributed, the scientific method, the public library, and just really setting forth this basis of we can find this information through research, and that research is available to all. And that's really his biggest contribution, I would say, at least, just in the public, opportunity of knowledge.
Yep. And the book goes on it talks about his school with Theophrastus.
Yes, who's his successor.
Right.
And he kind of set forth the beginnings of Stoicism. And he talks about Epicurus. We don't really have to go into Theophrastus too much.
No. The Epicureans,
Mm-hmm.
known for French food, I think. No.
I don't even know what that reference is.
Really? I always thought Epicurean was you really like good food and drink. Isn't that right?
I have no idea.
I think it's gone down through time.
Well, if it would, they'd be like the opposite, yeah.
The pleasure for Epicurus,
Mm-hmm.
Epicurus.
Yeah.
Pleasure is the beginning and end of a happy life.
Yes.
So they like good, tasteful stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, Epicurus, he really was a big critic of religion. This is kind of similar to Aristotle's thing about the fear of death is our biggest problem in society, and it's religion that makes us fear death and fear of, eternal punishment. It's interesting, he also adopts atomism, and so the soul just consists of atoms, and they're dispersed at death, and the soul ceases to be. But at the same time, he also says that gods exist, but they're just made up of atoms, but they do not disperse ever. So, gods are permanent. And he kind of says the same thing about the stars and celestial bodies. So it's kind of like a lot of times with these ancient philosophers, the planets and gods are just the exact same thing, and they talk about them interchangeably. And really to say that there are no gods isn't to say that we shouldn't have religion. It's a weird sort of, I don't know, it seems hypocritical to say that we shouldn't have religion, but then also to describe what gods are made of right after that. But
well, I guess they are
product of the times.
They're thinking of it as religion. They're thinking of it as reality, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
Stoicism.
Yes, Stoicism.
Zeno. Why are there no Zenos? I don't know any Zenos.
Oh, there's a Zeno in last reading.
No, I mean like modern day.
Oh, well, could have named me Zeno.
I should have.
You
I would have read
should
this
have.
book first. You did Zeno.
Yes. Be strange.
John would be Epicurus.
Yes.
Yeah, so the Stoics had, was it three main disciplines?
Yes.
Logic, ethics, and physics.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was interested by Zeno recommending a community of wives.
Yes.
A lot of that going on.
They're similar to the Epicureans in a way, because the Epicureans, we shouldn't have pleasure and that sort of thing, but they went about it in a different way, and that we should kind of replace pleasure with virtue. Not that we shouldn't really indulge ourselves in the material things of the world, but we also shouldn't cast them out completely. We need to have a good mix, and that best mix is just finding virtue the goodness and the happiness in life.
Yeah, and it was I like this description of it is that when he says it is the voluntary acceptance of nature's laws that constitutes virtue.
Yes.
And virtue is both necessary and sufficient for happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all trying to get to what makes a person happy, or the meaning of life, or contentment, and they're going back and forth between virtue, happiness, and pleasure. And people are still trying to figure that out.
I think it's interesting. They mentioned cynicism here, and we get a good passage of Diogenes of Sinope, who is just the best. He lived like a dog in a barrel, in a tub, and he wore coarse clothes and subsisted on alms. And
now, are alms donations?
Yes.
Okay.
And when Alexander the Great visited him in his barrel, just in the marketplace, I believe, Alexander the Great asked him, "What can I do for you?" Diogenes replied, "You can move out of my light."
Yeah.
So the cynics are like the extreme end of the spectrum. We don't need anything. Live in a tub, get donations. That's it, and you'll be happy.
That's a pretty ballsy thing to say to Alexander the Great. He's liable to chop your head off.
Yes.
But he rewarded him, I think. So I'm like,
yeah, I think it wasn't mentioned in the book, but I have heard that Alexander the Great weirdly liked Diogenes' principle of like, well, we don't need anything.
Right.
Just go live in the woods, go live in a barrel, do your own thing.
Well, it seemed like Alexander the Great didn't really have a moral philosophy. It was just to keep conquering people and expanding his power.
Yes.
So in a way, kind of go hand in hand in a weird way. So he doesn't have to worry about morality.
Yeah. Kenny talks a little bit about the other Stoics, Cleanthes, who succeeded Zeno, and he kind of just, his biggest thing was that God is a material constituent of the cosmos, so he's present in everything. And that kind of framed a little bit of Christianity later on, and that we can find God everywhere, kind of uses that to cement a monotheistic view of the world. And then there was Chrysippus of Soli, and he wrote a lot, and he was really the guy who really fully cemented Stoicism as a system. He doesn't really have too many, big philosophies, just kind of writes down the philosophies of other people. But his one philosophy was really that breath, or pneuma, is the vital principle for life, and that God and the soul are both made of pneuma.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting in a way. But Stoicism really just does become a big deal for a while. And it's easy to see why, because out of all of these different schools of thought, back then, I would say, at least, that Stoicism is probably the best of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the replacement of material things with virtue, what you can do for the common good, and that sort of thing.
It's logical, and, it has a certain ethics to it.
Certain goodness.
Moral philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So then it goes on to Lucretius, who I was bored with. But,
really?
You were interested in Lucretius?
Well, I was interested that philosophy shifted from Greek to Latin in the first century, and that was Lucretius's big deal. He was the first guy to really write a first complete Latin philosophical work. And he again was critical of religion, so we get just this recurring thing of criticism of religion. And he said that people can't really stand up to priests in fear of punishment because they don't understand the soul. And he kind of says that, standing up to priests won't damage your soul in a way, right? That's up to you. We really shouldn't fear the tyranny of priests. We should stand up to things. And again, he adopts Epicurean atomism. Everything consists of these natural bodies made out of atoms. He puts forth this weird little thing about words and letters. He compares matter and atoms to the letters and words, and that ignis and lignum are made up of almost the same letters, just as the things they signify, namely fire and wood, are made up of almost the same atoms, which just seems like a big leap in logic. But strange little bit there. Although he does, again, talk against pleasure with these big long paragraphs here that I will not read. Yes.
Interesting, I guess.
His big thing is, don't be afraid of eternal, suffering, because it won't happen. Death is the best release,
right?
Which is really gloomy.
Yes. Doesn't give you a whole lot of hope.
Yes.
As you get older.
Mm-hmm.
I like Cicero, though.
Yes. You like Cicero? You like Cicero?
Cicero was a good dude.
Is that a Dean Martin song?
Huh?
Is that a Dean Martin song?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, sounds like one.
It should be.
Should be.
We should
You
compose
call him up.
Be hard to do. I guess I
Yes.
get a Ouija board.
Yes.
No, I mean, I don't know if he's a good person, but certainly an active person, involved. Caesar and Mark Antony and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. So it's fascinating, and I think he had a lot of. I mean, it kind of went through him very quickly. Didn't really talk about. I guess maybe he wasn't a preeminent philosopher, but a lot of interesting things he wrote about, and certainly about living a virtuous life and that kind of stuff.
He heavily favored Stoicism, and I also liked his addition here. His biggest really contribution is that he set himself the task of creating a Latin vocabulary for philosophy, and says that a lot of those terms that he coined are still used today, and that really allowed philosophy to be carried on again from Greek into Latin, really through Cicero and Lucretius, to really broaden the scope of philosophy, which I think is a commendable thing.
Now we have one page about Jesus.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting. I think Jesus gets short shrift for how brilliant his philosophy was. His theology, it was really groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's some elements in Platonic philosophy and these other philosophers, but I mean, and of course, St. Paul is the one that articulated a lot of it in his subsequent letters that are in the Acts of the Apostles and all that. But I think more than one. I guess we'll get to more of it later. But
probably. But Kenny kind of gives him the short end of the stick here, saying he mostly borrowed a lot of his teachings from other things. Don't render evil for evil, like Plato said, using Socrates. Love neighbors as themselves, as he's just quoting Leviticus. Refrain from wrong thoughts and feelings, like Aristotle. So it's really just like he's just kind of saying, well, it's not really revolutionary, which I think isn't very
not
true.
Accurate, and that was revolutionary. It's still revolutionary, and turn the other cheek and love your neighbors yourself, and all of that was absolutely revolutionary.
It's very rebellious too.
Oh yeah,
I think what's missed a lot. This isn't in the book. This is just stuff that I remember from church because we're both Roman Catholics. I guess it is good to say.
It's always good to say that.
It is. It is.
We just lost all the Protestants.
Yes.
I mean, darn it. Gotta go to confession.
But it's interesting because really it's not just his teachings that were revolutionary, but it's in the way that he presented them was kind of rebellious. Because, the whole turn the other cheek thing, back in Roman law with Roman soldiers could only punish you so much. So if they slapped you once and you turned the other cheek, they would have to break their own law to slap you again, right? And so it's kind of weirdly revolutionary. We lose a lot of the historical context to it today, which is unfortunate. We kind of have to go through back all of that again and learn it.
Well, and also when he's questioned, he's a brilliant person when being cross-examined. Well, when they ask him, why should we pay the tax man for the evil? Well, whose picture's on that coin? Well, Caesar. Well, give to Caesar what's Caesar. I mean, it's revolutionary, and you're kind of accepting this evil government, but
you can separate that from your faith,
from your faith and your morality and your philosophy. So anyway, I mean, it's not in the book, so I guess we can just kind of move on. But maybe it'll be more in future chapters. I
do like how he describes St. Paul in his letters, which I thought was interesting. He frames them, which I guess is what they were, is that they were really debates with Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. And I never really thought about Paul's letters as debates or like direct challenges, because we've always been taught in school that they were just teachings to broad groups of people. But I guess it does make sense that they were challenges to these other, people out in...
I think most of them were responses to questions and crises, and he's just trying to shore up people's faith and the belief and give it a philosophical underpinnings of the parables and the teachings of Jesus. Yeah.
And I do like this passage. I hope you'll let me read it here about God being within us. God is not far from every one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. So it's kind of like going against idolatry,
right?
Saying that, we don't need to worship idols. We really worship God by helping our neighbor is where it's at.
Right. And who made the darn idols anyway?
Yes.
God didn't make them.
Yeah. God made us, though. So
A guy named Steve.
yeah, I don't think there were many people named Steve back
Or
then.
whatever the common name for Steve was back then. Some dude did it. Or some lady, I guess. Probably a dude. I don't know if they let women in the arts. Maybe they did.
Maybe. I don't know.
I'm not saying they couldn't. I'm just saying they would not have been allowed.
Yes. Then we go on to the Imperial Stoa. So the Stoa was the head of Stoicism. I don't think we mentioned that yet, but talks about Seneca. Seneca was an interesting dude.
Yeah.
He was advisor to Nero, and really kind of says that.
Been a dangerous job.
Yeah, he says that like Seneca was really like a limiting force on Nero in a way. Really helped him to kind of control himself, I guess, with his philosophies here.
Then I killed his mother, and everything went bad.
Yeah, that happens.
Only once.
Yes.
You only kill your mother once.
It really what Seneca's big thing was is that we should strive to separate ourselves from our passions. And it's really what's in the mind that matters when it comes to passions. Because he kind of describes like all these actions like weeping or turning pale. Those are just natural things. We can't help those things. We should really focus on what we're thinking about a certain situation. You know, if we get angry, we shouldn't wish to kill somebody. If we get sad, we shouldn't wish to harm ourselves, really to control those passions and keep living a virtuous life, which I think is such a great philosophy to have.
Also finally makes an argument against suicide.
Yes, this is great. I love this.
Where he says, men wait for God when he gives the signal and releases you from this service, then you may go to him. For the time being, though, stay at your post where he has stationed you.
Yes.
Which, a certain amount of logic to that. Mm-hmm. But at least, it's not just the sweet release of death, so why wouldn't you kill yourself with these other philosophers? If you have a bad day or whatever. I just thought it was encouraging.
It's great that he puts forth this notion that we only lose if we do commit suicide, because all these external forces acting on us, we can only lose to them if we lose ourselves. Right. It is winning when we overcome these things and keep on going, and that's basically the strongest we can be, is to overcome these things and not give in to suicide. Which this philosophy might have been directed to Nero at some point. It's probably highly likely. Then we kind of skip over really Marcus Aurelius a little bit, who is a big Stoic, another emperor. Doesn't talk too much about him. There's just a paragraph about him here. Right. He talks just a few notes about the brevity of life. We must work for the common good, the unity of mankind, and the corrupting nature of power. So it's really just kind of adapting these Stoic thoughts again. There's an interesting, more generally. And there's an interesting little passage about Galen, who was a medical doctor, and he discovered that nerves were linked to the brain, and those were what contracted muscles, and that it's the brain, not the heart, that is the seat of the soul, which I thought was just another little advance in science. Right. Interesting.
They're thinking the heart is because that's what's beating.
Yes.
You don't realize it's all in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess can't live without either.
Yeah. Then we move on to early Christian philosophy, and really the first thing that happens is that Stoicism really kind of fades after Marcus Aurelius' death. There's no really more leading figures to further the thoughts of Stoicism. And there was a big persecution of Christians, of course. And Marcus Aurelius executed Justin, who was the first Christian philosopher, and I've never heard of the guy. I don't know what his teachings are. But then there's a decent section here about Clement of Alexandria, who I thought was very, very interesting, because he kind of combats these...
Oh, okay. You're going to tell me. I was going to ask you why.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead and ask.
Well, why is he so interesting?
Well, because he puts forth, arguing against early Christians, saying that we shouldn't study philosophy. And he says that the study of philosophy is not only good it's not only just acceptable for a Christian to do, but it's almost necessary for any educated Christian to study the philosophy that came before you.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a really fascinating notion.
Well, you got to know what you know, and you got to learn what you don't know.
I guess so.
Isn't that pretty much what he's saying?
I guess.
If you don't learn what you don't know, then you'll never learn anything new.
That's true.
You will just know what you've already known.
Mm-hmm. And then it talks a little bit about Origen, who was another kind of followed Clement's teachings. He echoed, I think it was Paul saying that the soul exists before conception and before, he echoed Plato.
I've never heard of this guy.
Neither did I.
I don't know why we're giving this guy any thought.
Yeah.
I don't think he had any influence. So it's
maybe
kind
not.
of interesting how some of these people are mentioned.
Yes.
But
he
Jesus
like
gets
yeah.
a page and a half, and here's Origin.
Well, it's interesting in that he argued both Christian points and very like anti-Christian points, saying that we have the soul, but then it doesn't really matter what we do because any intelligent, rational beings will go to heaven anyway. They'll be saved and blessed, which is just strange to me because I feel like that goes against the whole Bible. And then here he is saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter."
Well, I wonder where he ended up with after he was tortured repeatedly and killed by the Emperor Decius.
Yeah,
but maybe we'll find out.
Yes,
after we die, or maybe not.
Yeah. And so there's this
He thinks we will because we're rational.
Yes. Well, we think we're rational. Are we rational? It talks a little bit about here about the revival of Platonism and Aristotelianism. I think I said it somewhat right that time. Aristotelianism. Something. It talks about Plutarch, and his greatest really contributions were that of a historian, and he wrote about a lot of Greek figures, Greek, stories and everything, and those were like the basis for a lot of Shakespeare's plays. A thousand years later. He was a Platonist, and we also have Alexander of Aphrodisias, who argued this point that intellect is God itself, in a way, which I thought was interesting, and that idea became very popular among Arabs, this idea that intellect is itself God, which goes a little bit against Christian belief, believing that intellect and free will are just gifts from God. They're not God themselves, but he does become popular among the Arabs, and he was an Aristotelian. Aristotelian, sure.
Well, then we finally get to Augustine at some point
yes.
here, and then he ends.
Well, it's because he really only talks about Augustine's classical philosophical teachings. He stops before we talk about his father of Christianity aspects, which I assume we'll talk about later.
He says we will.
Yes.
We're going to find out later.
But we talk first about Plotinus, and he's got a weird thing going on with the one, and it's derived in a way from Plato through his theory of ideas in a way, and where oneness is a key property of being. And it's kind of identical to the idea of the good, and he kind of argues that there's like a hierarchy to every aspect of life, basically. The one is the thing that we should achieve, the goodness, happiness, ultimate being. And then it's the mind, which is the locus of ideas, again, just the capital I ideas, the ideas of Plato. Then he talks about the soul is below that, and that's the creator of time and space, which looks up to mind and down to nature, which is the next thing, which creates the physical world, and then the lowest level is just matter. But really, we can't have any of those things without the other things. So he kind of sets up this hierarchy of everything, basically, which I just thought was a little bit of an interesting idea of how everything works.
Yeah.
No other thoughts on that one?
Only thing I can think of is The Matrix.
The Matrix?
Yeah, Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yes. It's Neo, the one.
Wasn't he the one?
Yes.
That's all I thought. It's just got another hierarchy of thought.
Yeah.
I wasn't interested in him at all.
Yes. I guess we'll be leaving with a little bit of a cliffhanger here with Augustine, because we only get like the first half of his teachings. And so St. Augustine of Hippo, who was alive from 354 to 430, he loved Plato, which I thought was interesting.
Right.
That was one of his big influence. He was heavily influenced by Plotinus, which was probably Plotinus's greatest contribution to philosophy as a whole, is that he influenced St. Augustine. And St. Augustine was really against skepticism, which is talked about here somewhere.
I think, when these, we'll get into it later, I'm sure, in the book, but, with St. Augustine and other Christian philosophers, they do a better job for me of explaining how Plato makes sense than actually reading Plato or trying to figure out how Plato makes sense.
Yes, I thought the exact same thing.
I think they kind of, they take it and it's almost like it's clay, and they work it, and it's something that is valuable. I'm down on Plato. But.
And he says basically he kind of goes against Plato's theory of ideas, in that the ideas have no extra mental existence, but they exist eternal and unchangeable in the mind of God. So we don't need like these, frameworks to prove the ideas. We just know that they are inherent and unchangeable and eternal in the mind of God. And it is God that is really himself, I guess, the idea, in a way in which all the ideas, perfection of everything is encompassed in God, which I thought was a very, very, very fascinating, very good approach to the theory of ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He also wrote on music, which I'm also always glad to hear. I'm a musician, like I said, I think last episode.
I think when we're done with this, you ought to read some St. Augustine.
I probably should.
Yeah.
And this really just kind of leaves us all here on a cliffhanger, because in 391, Augustine became a priest and then later a bishop, and it was then that his teaching shifted from classical philosophy to the father of Christian philosophy itself. So we'll be talking about that at some point.
And just know this, you are already a bishop.
I am.
You don't have to wait
Yes.
to be ordained.
I haven't heard that joke before. I'm always told I should become a priest so I can become bishop at some point.
Huh. No, they choose a different name, don't they?
Maybe. I know priests don't. I know Pope does.
Yeah, the Pope does.
Pope does. I don't know if bishops do.
I don't know.
So what's our bishop? We just got a new bishop, Archdiocese of St. Louis.
Maybe they don't.
I don't think they do, because I think his name's like Italian.
Doug?
No, it's not Doug.
No, it's Mitchell.
Mitchell, yes.
Yeah, Mitchell somebody.
Mitchell's, yeah. I want to say Mitchell like Giuliani? Is that right?
Giuliani?
No, maybe not.
I don't know.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different bishop.
I didn't get past Mitchell.
All right, well, that wraps up Chapter 2 of Anthony Kenny's A New
Next
History of Western
chapter is
Philosophy.
going to be logic, right?
Logic,
Looking
yes.
forward to that one.
Yes. So
I
am I.
wish we would have got more St. Augustine, but I guess...
Yeah, I'm assuming we'll talk about him later.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have to talk about the Christian philosophers at some point.
Well, it said Aristotle to Augustine, and then
it
a
ended,
whole bunch of
yes.
Aristotle, a bunch of these other knick-knack people.
But I am glad to hear a lot about Aristotle, because he's by far probably my favorite out of all of the ancient philosophers,
Yes, I agree.
Out of all the Greeks, yeah.
Fascinating how smart he was, and all these really key people living at the same time. You know, you had, well, almost the same time. You had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great. Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah, very fascinating. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up the podcast here?
No.
All right. Well,
Do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
I don't, really.
So what do you think of the travels of the history of philosophy from Thales to St. Augustine?
I think it's fascinating. I think it's been an interesting read. This section was a lot better than last section, I do have to say. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I hope our listeners feel the same about this episode. I hope we're improving over time and not downgrading, going down a downward slope here. I do want to say, like I said earlier about Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, if we finish this book, we should read that book together. Do another podcast.
We'll see.
We'll see.
I think I'll pick the next one.
We still have like 900 pages to go.
It's going to take us a while.
It's going to take us a while. Something to look forward to in 2 to 3 years.
I'll pick the next one, and it may be a book by Kurt Schlichter.
All right. Looking forward to it.
You should.
I am. All right. Well, this has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
And I have been Mark Bishop.
Oh, you said it this time. You didn't say I am still Mark Bishop.
You're not. You're Adam Bishop.
Oh, my mistake. All right. We're going to end it there.